Welcome to Marathon Champions, the podcast where running legends Benji Durden, Bill Rogers, and Ron Tabb share their timeless wisdom on marathon training and inspire listeners with their wealth of experience. These champions continue to impact the running world today.
Hey, Bill, I don't know how much time we got, but I got a story about your brother.
Charlie.
Yeah. So it's 1981, and I raced the Virginia 10 miler. And you and Frank had done that. You know, it's their 50th year this year.
Yes, I'm in touch with them. Are you talking?
Me too. So I might see you there. So anyway, I raced the Virginia 10 miler, and I was never a good downhill runner. And that damn first mile in Virginia was hell. And I ran it way too fast. I still won. But the next day, I could not walk. I couldn't lift my legs. I had to lift them up and to get out in and out of a car. So my next race is going to be the Freedom Trail in Boston.
Yeah.
All right. So your brother says that he put me up at his house.
He did? I didn't know.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like 3 stories, I think it was, I forget where. Anyway, had stairs. And I was given a room on the top floor.
Yeah.
And I couldn't get up those stairs, and I couldn't get down them. And so, and he'd go to work, and he'd come back and he'd say, well, did you go for a run today? And I'd lie to him, because here I am, I'm being brought in for a race, and I'm supposed to race this race on Saturday. It was 8 mile, the Freedom Trail.
Yeah,
I couldn't walk. I couldn't get up and down the stairs. I just did a short run today, and I didn't run that entire week. I was so sore. Now, when I finally raced the Freedom Trail, I think I won by about 3 minutes. But
wow.
I was so fresh because I hadn't done anything all week. But he's saying to me, how are you? How are you feeling? You ready for the race? Oh, yeah, Charlie, yeah, I'm ready. Couldn't walk. I couldn't get up and down the stairs.
I'm going to remind him about that story and everything.
Yeah.
Charlie and I are still in touch. Did you ever run the Bix race? Their 50th is coming up this July.
Yeah, a couple of times. But the downhill there was too, with my feet being there, I'm a scared downhill runner.
And can you tell us about
my feet?
Can you tell us about your foot surgeries as a kid? And I mean, this is mind-boggling, really.
Yeah, I was given up for adoption as a baby, and when it came time for me to start walking, my parents noticed that I wouldn't get up on my toes. And of course, you can't talk, you can't say anything. As I grew older, I wouldn't get up on my toes, and I would shuffle on my heels. And as I grew, these big bone things grew on my feet. I mean, I try to say that it's kind of like massive bunions, but nothing in between the big toe and the next toe. There was just empty space. So my foot, if that's my foot, my big toes started to go all the way out like this, and there was nothing in the middle.
Wow.
And so I wouldn't, it was painful. I couldn't wear shoes, obviously, with that amount of space. So I went barefoot a lot, and then my dad managed to find sandals where he could cut the straps so this part stuck out. So the doctors actually told my parents that they had never seen it before, and they wanted to wait until I was a teenager to do surgery so that my bones would be strong enough to manage it or heal from it or get better or whatever they had to do. So they waited until I was 13. And what they did was, when they did the surgery, they kind of took all the extra bone and moved my big toe over to go alongside. And then they had to transplant tendons to make the big toe work. So on both feet. So they put me into plaster casts, and when it came time to leave the hospital, and this is another thing where I say these doctors were geniuses, and if it hadn't have been for them, I wouldn't have run either. But when it came time to leave the hospital, their thought was, I had these plaster casts, and you can find the picture of me on my website or wherever, but it's the only picture I allowed my parents to take of me. It's my first day of high school, and I got plaster casts up to my knees. But they came up with the idea of this black leather boot. And I jokingly say, I think I'm the first person to have these boots that they give out to everybody now. because it was a black leather boot that they'd made, and on the bottom of the black leather boot was a rocker, like a rocking horse. And so they didn't give me crutches or a wheelchair when I left the hospital. They wanted me to learn that motion to go forward on my toes immediately as my feet were healing, because their worry was that when the cast came off, I would fall back into the old habit of being on my heels. I'd be too scared to go forward. So they were going to force me forward as my bones were healing. And so when the cast came off, first of all, my feet looked like everybody else's except for massive scars. But when I started to walk again, I started to go forward almost. I went into a running motion before I went into a walking motion. And 1 year later, I joined a running club.
There you go. And then you set a world record at 5K. That's quite a story.
I qualified for the 1972 Olympics in the 1500 meters. That was the first Olympics that had the 1500 meters, but I was only 16 years old, and they said I was too young to go, which is probably
maybe you were driven, and you had this issue with your feet. It's real serious. This gave you a drive, and your parents were very supportive, and I think that's key. And I also think where you grew up, New Zealand, perhaps it's a bit like growing up in the country or something like that. Ron, I don't know where you were in Missouri, and Benji in Georgia. If you were out in the country running the trails, the woods, the hills, it's like Kenya or Ethiopia a bit, maybe not the high elevation, but you know what I'm saying. So we came from these places. I grew up in Newington, Connecticut, and ran in the country. We were outdoors kids,
Yeah.
and rode our bikes and everything. And I read Roger Robinson's comments about what New Zealand is like, and the great athletes who come from there. It was Lydiard, but it was your environment combined with the training information, those sorts of things, So what a great story you had. And you still do,
I think so.
You're still running. You're still running, right?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I try and do 5 miles a day. Some days I walk, some days I walk, run, and some days
Yes.
I run. I think, my whole thing is to keep my feet as healthy as possible, and fingers crossed, I have no issues. I don't even have arthritis in them. And you think about the miles I've run. Those doctors they did an amazing job for me. As I say, fingers crossed, I'm still out there each day. Once again, I like the outdoors. I can't stand doing anything indoors.
Yeah. I think New Zealand, I mean, I've never been there, but I've seen the photos and everything. But I think we are meant to be outside with nature. It's just, we know that, but most people, I think, never got a chance for one reason or another to believe in themselves.
Yeah.
That's what I think you did, Ian. You found your path and everything. It's very exciting. And then you passed the word on and everything. But I'm going to tell my brother Charlie about that great story. I think it might have been a rental house he had. He now lives in Ipswich, up north of Boston, about 30 miles. And there's just 2 stories and everything. But
I think there was a little lake or a little pond or something close by.
Yeah, Spot Pond.
Yeah, I
He
think
lived
so.
in Stoneham, Mass, and I lived right
Yes.
next.
Yeah,
I was
I
in
think that was
Melrose.
it.
I used to north of Boston. I'd go down to that pond, run around there. There were woods you could run in, and just amazing, no
Well,
question.
that's really the whole thing. I mean, it's really like the Virginia 10 miler 50 years. I mean, Rudy Strout was all in with it going pro. He was very supportive. And now they're 50 years old, and they've got pictures of you and Frank, and I mean, Rod Dixon won it, Johnson. I mean, they're going to try and bring us back. And so they're thrilled. I mean, some of these races, as you guys know more than me, are going to be coming up on their 50th. I mean, it's going to be pretty close. And I think that's all credit too, that the enduring ones are the ones that were started in the 70s.
Well, exactly.
All of them. I mean, it's just, that's a credit to the sport.
I think
that
Frank
they're
Schroeder's
still
gold.
here.
When Frank Schroeder won his gold, that was in the marathon was mind-boggling because Americans had only one gold had been won in 1908 by Johnny Hayes in the marathon. Americans weren't considered very effective marathoners by the Europeans who kind of ruled the sport in the marathon in those days for many years, Europeans. But I think
Buddy
I
Edelin
just think this
had made a name for himself. He had the world record for a while in American.
Edelin.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's true.
yeah. But he went to Europe to be a marathoner. He wasn't doing it in the
Yes.
US because there was no.
Well, it kind of shows you, Benji, doesn't it? What
Yeah.
we're saying, that how hard the road runners had to fight for our sport, and that even somebody had to leave the country,
Yeah.
train with the higher level athletes in Europe or something. So we're in a better place than ever before. But I sort of think that the shoe companies, I'm not sure, aren't doing as much with the
Well,
athletes,
yeah, they're
American
a
athletes.
company is in business to make money, and they're making good money now without having to put a lot into elite athletes, though they still do. I mean, Nike has a
Yeah.
deep elite athlete program, but it's not just runners anymore. It's all sport.
Yeah.
And basketball is probably their biggest.
That's the thing, Benji. The other sports have gotten massive,
Yeah.
much bigger, and there's gambling in them now today in basketball or football. Our sport is still in this Olympics world, I think. And I think I'm waiting to see which marathon is going to give that big prize money out, because then I think that will lift things up.
Well,
Maybe
that
Nike
will, but I personally, there still needs to be some sort of seed system. I mean, there needs to be a way for young athletes to say, look, I can do this and get better, and somebody's going to support me and pay attention to me, because it's financially is part of it, but also it's attention. I mean, we did this initially because people paid attention to us. I mean,
Yes.
Anne, you weren't making money, but you were getting attention.
Mhm.
And that, the money was gravy. It made it easier for us to do what we were doing, but it wasn't the primary reason we did what we were doing. We were doing it because we liked being
We
competitive.
improved.
Like,
The cool thing about our sport is everyone does improve.
yeah,
But
I mean,
people
up to a
don't
point.
know
I mean,
that.
we get to my life.
Yeah.
We're
We're
not
going
improving
backwards
anymore.
now,
We're just
Bill.
trying to hold still.
Which is okay. That's normal.
Yeah.
That's totally normal.
No, I've often said, I mean, I think the person that I've talked to the most through the years is Tony Brevis in
Yeah.
terms of his ideas. I mean, I sat on the board of Running USA for 6 years, and Tony was on there, and oh my Lord, the times when we would basically say exactly what you said, Benji. We need a feeder system. We should be starting the system like tennis and golf, where they start the younger ones off and they have the junior or the whatever it is in golf, the amateur. They use the word amateur. We could use the word juniors or feeder, whatever words we use. But we're not creating that situation. It's so top heavy now. So even if you give out $1 million for the Ethiopian that's going to win the Boston Marathon, that's not going to do anything for our sport, because anybody reading the headline, $1 million to so and so for the marathon, is already looking at the NBA and the baseball with $200 million contracts for 5 years. So, but in terms of the feeder system, where you've got, you watch the Masters golf, and they've got some of these young ones playing in there, like
Juniors.
they bring them in to, and it's frightening for them, and you can tell the kids are as nervous as shit, but they're at the Masters.
Yeah.
And so to be able to do it where in our sport with the road races, that you bring a whole bunch of either high school or young college athletes in to a Peachtree and give them their starting line and allow them to run in a huge, race, and give them their own starting line at some point. Or I don't know how. I don't know what the answer is. But Benji's exactly right. We don't have a feeder system.
Well, one of the positives our sport has in the US, and I think worldwide, is cross country. I've heard that 500,000 or so, 250,000 young boys and women and girls are running cross country at the high school and collegiate level. It's only when it gets to international, it's kind of tough, it's And when you look at the old days of world cross country, how deep and how big the fields were, it's very tough to excel today at that level. But at the younger level, because I think people are understanding, these young people, and especially the girls who weren't there so much, and we know that history, and they're out there now. And I see on ESPN, our national sports network, owned by Disney, and there are the national championships, and it's just incredible to see thousands of kids. And I remember being out at a cross-country race in California and seeing thousands of kids running. And in my little hometown of Newington, they're starting a program for middle school kids. You know, they've got a new coach there. I had a really good coach way back in the 60s, me and Charlie, my brother. And so I think there's growth in the sport that's huge, but it's not visible.
Well,
the
and part of the problem too is the cross country feeds into track. It's not feeding into the roads. And it's like the roads are
It is to
really
a
an
degree.
afterthought.
Well,
So
in the
you
marathon,
look at our cross country stars. Almost everybody that's been a top cross country runner has gone from cross country into track. And that's partially because of the NCAA system, because the NCAA, their distance athletes are track athletes. They're not going to run road races. Although back when I was in college, there was an NCAA marathon championship.
yeah.
But
Connor
we have,
Baines.
and because we don't have a road race feeder system, our marathon isn't as good as it could be. Our women are doing really well. Our men are doing okay, but the depth isn't there. And part of it, it'll be kind of maybe the same way it was when we were starting out. There were really good 3-mile and 6-mile runners, and there were so many of them, they started running the roads because they couldn't succeed at the 3-mile and the 6-mile on the track. So they started running road races and moved to the marathon. And maybe we'll see the same thing. And maybe we're starting to see the same thing because we have people that, are decent. I mean, well, look, Connor Mance. I mean, he's able to run really good 10,000s on the track, but not good enough to make a team on the track. So he went to the marathon.
Yeah.
Now he's, 207 marathoner.
Yeah.
And so but there isn't a lot of road racing other than the marathon. We all ran lots of road races that weren't marathons. And there are lots of road races, but there's no support for somebody that wants to run them other than, you can run it. Where's your entry fee?
Yeah.
Sometimes I wonder if cross-country road racing marathoning should have split off from USA Track and Field.
Well, we've talked about that for years, and it would be a great idea. I just don't know how we pull it off.
And it could be funded by the big marathons and financial success. Well, I think we should reconvene on that.
Yeah, it'd be nice to come up with that answer. Well, this has been a really, really good talk.
Yes.
We appreciate you coming and joining us, Anne. And
it's just great to see all your faces and chat. It's great. Good for you for starting this up, all of you. Ron and I have never met in person. We figured out we've been in the same places quite a number of times, but
it was crazy.
I still haven't met Ron in person. So
yeah, it's crazy. I mean, you were in Eugene at the same time that I was there, and it's amazing that we didn't even cross paths.
Yeah.
I don't know how that happened. Were you friends with Mary?
No, we were competitors.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, there was nothing negative. It's just we were competitors. And to be honest, I was, awestruck by her, so there was that difference too. It's like, oh my gosh, that girl can run. And all I'm doing is trailing her by 100 meters in a mile. So there was that too. So, and I don't know when the last time I think I raced Mary was the Legs Mini Marathon in New York in '88. It was a huge women's field and she ran the 10K. That's the last time I saw Mary. But all of our stuff was competitive, racing each other.
So I was curious, Bill, Benji, you and I, or all three of us, we finished in the top 10 in New York. in '79. We're going back to discussing the prize money under the table payments. So I remember being called by the New York Times about us, me receiving prize money there.
Yeah.
Do you know if the women were getting under the table payments then?
I can tell you one story in regards to Patty Catalano Dillon. No, in
Yeah.
fact, she had a rough time, and I know some other runners who had a rough time. Um, because I think Fred was still, you got to remember, Fred was a former tennis player who he got into running and he found that he loved it. And next thing you know, he's the race director of one of the bigger cities in the world, biggest in the United States, and he's dealing with all these athletes who who might want to be paid. So this is what happened. The women didn't have the power then, the numbers, I don't think. Greta came on the scene, she changed everything.
Yeah.
Because Fred and Greta became friends.
Yeah.
Fred was a
Well,
really unique person. He loved the sport, loved the marathon. And he and Greta were, when he became sick and Greta ran the marathon with him,
mhm.
one of the great stories, I think, in our sport. But I think Fred, didn't always, know how much he should give to somebody. It was a dicey subject. Can you have someone do a clinic and be paid for a clinic? Well, why not? Or represent the New York Roadrunners in some way that is beneficial to the New York Roadrunners. So I think he was walking that fine line. For example, when the prize money issue came up, former mayor of New York City, Mayor Koch, said, well,
Gosh, yeah.
if they're going to have this big marathon and make all this money, then they have to pay for the police.
Yeah.
So this, and I know another race where a guy was putting up his own money to bankroll the race. It was a half marathon and a kids race in San Francisco area, outside of San Francisco, in Oakland, in fact. And the police union wanted way too much money to cover the race, and he couldn't afford it, and so they didn't have the marathon, so there were these political, social issues, but look at the great success when, Fred kept working and he finally agreed. He said he moved to the Boston he moved to prize money before the BAA would. The BAA was hanging on to the past, but I know some top runners who were didn't get contacted Fred and were kind of rebuffed,
Yeah.
and
Well, I
just
was talking to Anne and I, we were talking yesterday about uh, the differences between the men and the women. And I was, when Mary and I were together, she was making less money than what I was making. This was in '81.
oh,
And so, Anne's talking about, Cascade. Was that your first payday, Anne, in
Yes,
'81?
and
Yeah.
yes, and I mean that, and the our sport needs to take credit on the fact that they immediately gave equal prize money to men and women. That, look at all the other sports where the women had to fight for equality. Our sport did it immediately.
Well, that's still going on. I mean,
Yeah, yeah, that's what I mean. Our sport did it immediately. We should take credit for that.
the discrimination is it's unbelievable. Even in today's society, you're seeing women that are still making less than what the men are making now. And that was what when Harry and I were together, that was one of the things I said, this isn't fair, and you need to stand up, for what you should be making as much as what, uh, Craig Virgin, because Craig was one of the highest paid athletes and most visible athletes, along with Bill and Frank at that time. And so I don't know why she wasn't getting paid on equal basis at that time. And you go back to talking about Norman and Sven Army.
Yeah.
You know who I'm talking about?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So I remember Mary and I were in Oslo for Bislett, and the guys were all getting paid. Talking about the under the table payments. The track guys were all getting paid, and Mary wasn't getting anything. And
Really?
I just saw that as complete BS.
So
I mean,
stupid.
being discriminated against in that manner.
One thing, the
Yeah,
BAA,
she was the best in the world at that point.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
unbelievable.
Oh,
I
and
mean,
then
Huh.
at that meet,
But we had to be
the
quiet about it. That was the problem. We had to,
yeah, that was it. We had to be because you didn't want to lose your amateur status.
in 86, when John Hancock came on board, the leader of Hancock, Dave D'Alessandro, said there's going to be equal prize money for men and women. In 86, it took a while for the BAA, but once Hancock got it, Dave said, yeah, it's going to be equal. And it's always been equal. The challenge now is about appearance money. And that's an agent's
Yeah,
world.
that
Well, no, the agent's world is a very hidden world, you know?
yeah.
It's like the marketplace or something. What if you have a really good agent? And I think some of the agents aren't you know, we've seen that drug issue hit some of the athletes, and the agents then kind of disown and drop the athlete, and the athlete takes the burden, takes the hit. But I think some of the agents who are well-known offenders in the sport, you know,
Well, they're agents and coaches that, athlete handlers that are really the problem. The athletes just do what they're told to do. I mean, especially a lot of the Kenyan athletes that I've known over the years tell me that that's how it works. You know, they're told this is the way you do things, and you got to not talk about it. And if you want
we were told not to talk about it either, Benji, but we did.
well, no,
And
but no, I'm talking about drugs. They sign a non-disclosure agreement when they sign with a particular agent,
Yeah.
and then they find out why they signed, because they're told they have to take these drugs.
We
yeah,
gotta investigate that one.
until we have a I mean that's another whole topic.
Yeah, that'd be another discussion, maybe about a 45 session. I mean, the problem is we don't know enough to know, the four of us, we just get rumors. We don't really know what's going on.
Well,
Yeah, until it becomes an international testing situation where it's not under the jurisdictions of every national administration. Until it becomes national, we can't trust what's going on. I mean, I just know in New Zealand, the track and field athletes are tested like drives them crazy. They've got people turning up at their doors all the time. And that's a wonderful thing. And it's a small country and you're not dealing with as many people, and you're obviously got the money to fund it. You don't have to travel very far to find the athletes. It's much easier to do it in New Zealand. But, our track and field athletes are tested just nonstop. And that's a hard thing to do in some of these countries, unless you've really got the foundation in place to be able to get it done. And it's too lenient. It's just not being managed until something's done at an international level in a very serious way. We will all be kept guessing, which is sad. It's really, really sad, because I would like to sit at the Olympics and watch this year and watch the performances and not have to second guess what I'm watching.
Yeah.
That's the sad thing about the sport now, is we are second guessing the times that are being run.
And then there's the issue of going back in time for athletes who are very suspected or in countries where there was considerable doping. And we know that occurred, for example, like in East Germany.
Yeah.
Maybe to a degree in Russia, and maybe to a degree here.
When I competed in Montreal, one story, when I competed in Montreal, because I competed against all those East German women. And I mean, look at some of the records are still held by those women from that era. And I remember a Russian coach coming to me on the warm-up track and saying, "You need to come to Russia. We can really make you very good." And so, you just had to look at them physically. And you'd line up against them in Europe, and you'd like Kazankina and Grigina, and you go, "Good heavens, I don't look anything like these aren't women." I mean, it's just, and you just go, "Oh, if I have to look like that, I'm just quitting the sport." You didn't really know. I was 20 years old, or young, naive, or whatever. But then it all came out, and sadly, many of those women have come out, and the wall came down, and all the records were found, and we found it out. But
well, the really cool thing, I think, is that Germany has moved ahead, and I think World Athletics is now saying that there are these shadow medals that were won by some of these athletes, and that federations can now apply if they felt like their athlete, an athlete from some country, let's say New Zealand or Australia or anywhere in the world, lost to an athlete from that country, since they have records of who was taking
Starting
medications.
with Don Cardone.
Yeah, Cardone missed. I mean,
Yeah,
and
Don
then
Cardone.
Frank missed his second gold medal because of Serpinski.
Yep. There you
Yeah,
go.
so I think it's got to be pinned down more, and I think Sebco's trying to move that way with the athletes integrity unit. Terrific hard work, and so it is but I think it's at least they're trying, and that's
Mhm.
everything,
That's
Do you think that they're slow because they're afraid of giving sport even a greater black eye than it has now?
That's true. The Olympic officials, everything at the Olympics is supposed to be good, and for the athletes, it generally is. The athletes are, but I think there's these other forces that, I don't know, sometimes it's like the case with Ben Johnson, the great Canadian sprinter, who was a very poor guy. He came from Jamaica and gets caught up in this system, where he ended up taking drug, and to win the money issue, it is complex. And maybe if federations supported these up and coming poor athletes better. I've heard Jemima Sumgong, I think the Olympic gold medalist from Rio, speak about that. If the Kenyan Federation could help their athletes more, there'd be less issues of athletes trying to get an edge with the medication, So
But
we'll
Ben
see.
Johnson, he got nailed, but in that final, and so there were a number of athletes who later on cheating as well.
Yeah, it's a tough thing.
Linford Christie was another one that got. I
It's
can't remember everyone in that final, but and
and
even
it's
the
amazing, Ron.
winner.
Look
Sorry?
at some of the athletes today are getting their medals. Didn't Shalane Flanagan get a medal, or Kara Goucher get a medal like 8 years after they legitimately
I'm
won?
trying to remember. Yeah, someone. Someone just did.
It's not
That's
an
wrong.
isolated incident either. It happens a lot. As well, and then we go, to our more focus. And the Kiplagat is still owed $1 million by the International Marathon, because she technically won the or is it $500,000? I think it was $500,000. I think it was $1 million total between the men and the women, but she
World
technically
Marathon
won after
Majors.
they disqualified the Russian woman. But she has never seen that money.
The money's really tiny compared to other sports.
Well, yeah, it is, but
Our sport has
$500,000
to
is
pay
still a
up
lot
or
of
bring
money.
up or do something better. Oh,
Well,
well.
I can attest that some money is better than no money, and that's
Oh,
what
yes.
when we started. That's the way it was.
Oh, yeah, that's what I
Yeah.
mean. I sit here, and I couldn't be more grateful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
me too.
Couldn't be more
We were
grateful.
lucky, really. Our
Yeah.
generation was
Because
lucky.
think we were.
the generation before us had it a
Yeah.
lot worse.
They were the ones that had no money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We were fortunate.
Where were the pioneer? We were kind of the pioneers of the money scene.